regents of the university, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are gathered here today to celebrate the 98th birthday of the statewide University of California and the 47th year in the life of UCLA. The audience is asked to remain standing during the playing of the national anthems and the invocation to be given by the Reverend R. Parker Jones, Rector, St. Albans Episcopal Church, Los Angeles.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we beseech Thee with Thy gracious favor to behold the University of California, that knowledge may be increased among us and all good learning flourish and abound. Bless all who teach and administer and all who learn. Give noble and peaceful intentions to their labors, both at home and abroad. More especially we beseech Thee to guide Thy servant, the Prince Philip, that he and all those here assembled may reverently use their freedom and liberties in the maintenance of justice and truth among all men and nations. And finally grant that in all humility of heart and mind we may ever look to Thee, who art the fountain of all wisdom, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
gives me very great pleasure to welcome all of you here today on behalf of my colleagues in the UCLA family. Especially am I happy to greet and introduce to you those members of the Board of Regents of the University of California who are here with us. Please hold your recognition until all the regents have been introduced. Regent Edwin W. Pauley, whose name is not unfamiliar to this campus, especially in the context of the building in which we find ourselves this morning. Regent Edward W. Carter, Chairman of the Board. Will my bashful friends rise as I call their names? Regent Dorothy B. Chandler. Regent John E. Canaday. Regent Clark Kerr. Regent Glenn M. Anderson. Regent William E. Forbes. Regent Jess M. Unruh. Regent Lawrence J. Kennedy, Jr., Regent John R. Mage, and Regent-elect H.R. Haldeman. Ladies and gentlemen, the members of the Board of Regents who are here today. I hope you will pardon me if for a moment I deliver an aside not scheduled by the program creators. I cannot help but at this moment express to those anonymous gentlemen, probably not here, or those who are here will know to whom I refer, my enormous admiration and gratitude for what has happened in this hall in the last 24 hours. It may be hard for many of you to realize, but on Friday and Saturday just past, the regional finals or semifinals of the NCAA basketball tournament were held here. And on Monday morning, we have a hall fitted out for this exercise. Gentlemen, wherever you are, we are in your debt, perhaps more than in the debt of anyone in this audience. And finally, now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you an old friend and an extraordinarily helpful helpmate, if I may use the phrase, in the ongoing development of this campus at UCLA, the President of the University of California, Dr. Clark Kerr.
Thank you. Chancellor Murphy, Your Royal Highness, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to greet once again the members of our university community assembled here, students, alumni, faculty, regents, on this occasion of Charter Day, to welcome back old friends, to extend our hospitality to our distinguished visitors, and in particular to our Charter Day speaker, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. We're also very pleased to have with us, and I should like to ask each of them to stand briefly for your recognition, the Honorable Alfonso Bell, the United States Congressman from the 28th Congressional District in which UCLA is located. The Honorable Robert S. Stevens, member of the California Assembly from the 60th District, in which UCLA is also located. The Honorable Burton Chase, Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Los Angeles County. The Honorable Samuel W. Yorty, Mayor of the City of Los Angeles. Colonel V.A.J. Heald, MBE, DSO, MC, aide to His Royal Highness, Prince Philip. And I believe the next gentleman and the last gentleman is in the audience rather than on the platform. but we should like to acknowledge his presence as well, the British Consul General, Andrew A. Franklin. We are observing today the university's 98th anniversary, and thus the beginning of our 99th year. There have been many and profound changes in the University of California since Governor Haight signed our charter 98 years ago. From a tiny institution, we have become a large one. From one campus serving a relatively small constituency, we have grown to 9 campuses, serving the whole state and looking beyond the boundaries of California to the nation and to the world. From a limited undergraduate curriculum, our academic program has come to concern itself with virtually all fields of instruction and research. From a provincial institution of little distinction, we have become a university of some consequence in the intellectual world. All this growth has been based on the constant support of the people of California for their state university, but is based on more than this support alone, and in particular on the concept of the nature of a university as it has developed in Great Britain. Oxford and Cambridge have set standards for all of us in the independence of the university from political control, in the quality of the faculty, in the role of the faculty in the governance of the university, in devotion to the instruction of undergraduates. The Scottish universities, centuries ago, introduced the lay board into the governing structure of the university, a practice America later adopted from Scotland. London, before our own land-grant universities, carried higher education to new elements of the population and into enlarged areas of endeavor. Currently, the new universities of Britain are pioneering new curricula and new approaches, and the eyes of the whole university world are upon them. Britain, since World War II, has been developing a policy that no qualified student should be denied a university education for economic reasons. And today, approximately 80% of all university students receive financial assistance. The American equivalent of this policy has been the principle of tuition-free education in our land-grant universities. This has been the historic policy of the University of California. But today, that policy is being challenged, and I should like to speak very briefly about this challenge. First, the American ideal of equality of opportunity means, above all, in the context of the modern world, equality of opportunity for an education as far as each student's talent can take him. Yet the chance that a student will get a college or university education is approximately 3 times as great if his family is in the top quarter of the income range than if it is in the bottom quarter. The introduction of tuition could only widen this regrettable discrepancy. We should be a better state if we sought to lower rather than to raise this ratio of 3 to 1. Second, the taxpayer in California is not unduly burdened by the costs of public higher education. Appropriations as a percent of state personal income are 0.5%, 0.50. The second lowest of the 13 western states, including Alaska and Hawaii. The average of these states is 0.76. Only Nevada is lower than California at 0.48. Among our neighboring states, Arizona is 0.71, Oregon 0.89, Utah 0.90. The average for the relatively poor and less developed nations of Africa is higher than in California, 0.56. Yet California's system of public higher education is as good as that of any comparable region in the world, and perhaps better. May I quote from John Gardner, former president of the Carnegie Foundation, and now Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Having looked at colleges and universities in every corner of the nation, I can tell you that California has no equal among the states in the strength and diversity of its higher education institutions. It is clear that Californians learned early one of the most important lessons the modern world can teach, that the future of our children and the economic health of the community are both dependent on sound higher education and lots of it. May they never forget that lesson. Third, California's investment in the skill of its people has been a good investment. It has attracted to this state the most modern types of industries with the highest requirements for trained human talent. Per capita income exceeds that of the nation as a whole by 20%. Fourth, the quality of public life is closely related to educational opportunities. John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the United States, had this to say: "I consider knowledge to be the soul of a republic, and as the weak and the wicked are generally in alliance, as much care should be taken to diminish the number of the former as of the latter. Education is the way to do this, and nothing should be left undone to afford all ranks of people the means of obtaining a proper degree of it at a cheap and easy price." In summary, may I suggest that instead of closing doors, we should be opening them wider. That instead of concentrating on the rising costs of higher education, we should concentrate on the benefits from it that rise even faster. That instead of counting so carefully the dollars that go into higher education, we should count more carefully the more useful and enjoyable lives that come out of it, and the better environment for the effective practice of the democratic life that it fosters. That instead of peering myopically at current burdens, we should open our eyes to a future where higher education, as never before in history, is the path to realizing the welfare of mankind around the world. That instead of turning our backs on our historic policy of free tuition, we should take pride in it, endeavor not only to preserve it, but also to extend it, to provide, as England has already done, that no qualified student should be denied a university education for economic reasons. That is the way to assure progress in the human condition. It is now my very great privilege to present to you our speaker of the day, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Knight of the Garter, and Knight of the Thistle. Prince Philip, husband of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of England, is the son of Prince Andrew of Greece and Princess Alice of Battenberg. He was educated in Salem, Germany, and Gordonstown, Scotland. Went to sea as a midshipman in the British Royal Navy in 1939, saw active service throughout World War II, including the final year of the war in the Pacific, and rose to the rank of lieutenant at the end of hostilities. His life and responsibilities underwent a dramatic change in 1947 with his marriage to Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen of England. He maintained, however, the active interest in many forms of sport, in travel, in exploration, and in new ideas that have always marked his character. He is concerned with the improvement of society, and particularly with broadening the opportunities open to young people. Your Royal Highness, it is the greatest of pleasures to have you as our honored guest and our Charter Day speaker today.
Well, Mr. President, Mr. Chancellor, Regents, ladies and gentlemen, I have no doubt at all that your invitation to me to speak at this Charter Day meeting was meant as a kindness and a compliment. Naturally, I accepted your invitation in that spirit, and also very much aware that to be asked to address the members of one of the greatest universities in the world on its 98th anniversary of its foundation is an honor reserved to very few. And may I add that I appreciate very deeply your intention to confer an honorary degree upon me this morning. However, sir, I must confess that the glow of satisfaction which your invitation gave me faded all too quickly when I began to contemplate the problem of composing something suitable to say. It's not exactly as if I'd never been confronted with this sort of problem before. It's just that I've never been faced with anything like this in what is to me a totally strange environment. For one thing, at home I can be reasonably certain that I am in fact saying what I mean to say. My experience of the United States is just sufficient to appreciate the pitfalls which a common language can dig for the unwary. There's always that nasty feeling that what you think I am saying is not quite what I mean. And for another thing, I never had the privilege or misfortune, depending on which way you would like to look at it, of attending a university myself. May I hasten to add that it wasn't that I tried and failed to get in. It so happens that the war was about to start, so I tried and I succeeded to get into the Navy. However, the result is that my experience of universities is rather limited, in spite of the fact that I've accumulated quite a long list of degrees in recent years. I need hardly add that they're all honorary. Somebody described it as getting your education by degrees. I'm also chancellor of 2 universities. But don't let that fool you. It only means that I'm a sort of superior, unpaid, and preferably silent president. So I hope you will appreciate why my enthusiasm for the honor of addressing you is tempered by a good deal of anxiety. And of course, to make matters worse, I've chosen what appears to be a particularly inappropriate subject. And this is one of the problems of language, because I'm going to talk about leisure. Now, if you will forgive me, I will probably forget to say leisure all the way through, because the way English is spoken on the other side of the Atlantic, it's leisure. So when I say leisure, I mean leisure. Well, to talk about leisure at a university where the whole weight of authority is directed, more or less hopefully, to getting the students to do some work, may seem almost subversive. But I think it's relevant all the same. After all, if you don't learn how to use your leisure at a university, you're not getting your money's worth. I have no doubt at all that everyone knows what I mean by leisure, but to make quite certain, I want to quote a definition of leisure by a fellow countryman of yours, Paul Weiss, who is, I believe, Sterling Professor of Philosophy at one of those Eastern universities called Yale. I don't know if you've heard of it. He says that leisure time is that portion of the day not used for meeting the exigencies of existence. And this means that in that time it is possible to do things for their own sake and not as a means to an end. And just in case there is still a shadow of doubt, let me quote the Oxford English Dictionary, named after an even more Eastern centre of learning. Leisure, the state of having time at one's disposal, time which one can expend as one pleases, free or unoccupied time. Well, now, leisure is certainly not a manifestation of modern civilization. In the strictly hierarchical and the slave-based societies the subject of leisure loomed very large for a proportion of the population. Of course, it was no problem at all to the rest of the population because they didn't have any. Aristotle, for instance, suggested that the purpose of education was the wise use of leisure. I suspect that some students, and not necessarily of philosophy, are more likely to say that education provides almost unlimited leisure. There is evidence that primitive man was also confronted by leisure. It is reasonable to suppose that cave paintings, and indeed all art forms down the ages, had their origin in leisure time, because I don't suppose that these ancient artists could be described as professionals in the sense that they practiced their art as one of the exigencies of their existence. In the 1880 presidential campaign, James A. Garfield put his finger on it when he suggested that the struggle of the human race is divided into two chapters. First, the fight to get leisure, and then the second fight of civilization, what shall we do with our leisure when we get it? Although the definition of leisure applies now just as much as ever, the problems which leisure raises now are of an entirely different order. The mechanical or technological age in which we live has produced a totally new form of civilization. For one thing, a much greater proportion of the population of technologically advanced countries has more leisure time at its disposal. Then there are more and different ways of using leisure time, while increasing prosperity is giving people wider opportunities to fill their leisure time with rewarding activities. Leisure, in fact, which for most people throughout history was only on the fringe of existence, is now rapidly becoming a central feature of our whole egalitarian environment. Garfield's first fight is being won, at any rate in the more advanced countries. Well, I must confess that I'm interested in leisure in the same way that a poor man is interested in money. I can't get enough of it. Furthermore, I have no problem whatever in filling my leisure time, and I worry not at all whether what I do is good or wise or likely to improve my character or likely to help me become a whole man, whatever that may mean. I've had no problems yet. I mention all this because great and worthy thinkers down the ages have succeeded in creating out of the simple facts of work and leisure a veritable cockpit of moral, philosophical, and even religious argument. Well, I'm not going to concern myself with this because it inevitably leads into the ridiculous discussion of what is the proper use of leisure. And quite enough human misery is caused by the self-righteous trying to impose their myopic standards on the rest of the community. Leisure is a fact, and what you do with it is a matter of individual choice, influenced, no doubt, by personal, ethical, moral, or religious factors, as the case may be, and, of course, by the knowledge or lack of knowledge of the possibilities. Well, if you accept Aristotle's view of education and leisure, you may have difficulty in finding a job, but then that wasn't his problem. If you subscribe to what is sometimes called the Protestant ethic, that only honest, hard work is good, you will then always and inevitably have a bad conscience about having any leisure at all, and a sense of guilt whatever you do with it. I'm sure it is this puritanical hangover which produces the attitude that the only things which are fun are either immoral, illegal, or fattening. Modern civilization in practice is creating a new ethic, which is simply that work is a means of gaining leisure. And unfortunately, it is doing it in a typically human, haphazard, and confused way. I think we're all agreed that without moral complications, the ideal is to do as little work as possible for the highest possible reward. But is everyone agreed that we should work shorter hours each day, or fewer days each week, or fewer weeks each year? Dr. Marion Clausen, for instance, has worked out that if you reduce the average number of hours worked in the week from 40 to 32, you can either cut each day's work from 8 to 6.5 hours, or you can cut the number of working days in the week from 5 to 4, or as a third alternative, you could give 1 week's paid vacation in each of 3 quarters of the year and a month's vacation in the fourth quarter, and 6 months every 6 years, every 5 years. And of course, any combination or permutation of these alternatives. Whatever you choose, the effect is to increase the total time available for leisure. The division of work and leisure is not always sharp and distinct. Some may use free time from one job to take another in order to make more money. Some are so involved in their jobs they don't make any distinction at all. Others can manage to integrate work and leisure activities in such a way that there is no formal allocation of time to one or the other. Just think how much business is transacted in sporting clubs, fishing expeditions, or even in restaurants and nightclubs. I'm not, of course, referring to all the transaction conducted in these places. Even other people are prepared to work long hours for relatively little money because they feel their work has some special quality about it, in the social service sense, for instance, or because it gives them particular satisfaction. The selection of a job is seldom entirely dependent upon the pay and prospects. Fringe benefits of all kinds play a large part. Not least are the opportunities and the arrangements for leisure occupations. Now, leisure is only a problem in two senses. When any particular activity becomes popular with a great many people, there is inevitably a problem in finding suitable space and facilities to cater for the demand. And this problem is naturally far more serious in the small, overcrowded British islands than it is here. For example, Britain is rapidly running out of suitable coastline for all the people who want to take their vacations by the sea. The hills and wild country hardly contain the new army of campers and hill climbers. Stretches of inland water attract sailing boats, water skiers, swimmers and skin divers, fishermen, naturalists, bird watchers and hunters. The skiing resorts of Europe are getting more and more crowded every year, and even specially attractive summer resort areas, they're developed so rapidly and ruthlessly that its character is bound to be changed by the sheer weight of numbers of people pouring into it. I don't pretend to know what is the right answer, but provision for leisure is very big business already, and I can't help feeling that unrestricted exploitation is not necessarily going to achieve the sort of long-term pattern we would like to see. And furthermore, if the whole development of leisure facilities is to be decided entirely by what is profitable, many opportunities will be missed. If profit is the criterion, well, you may get a lot of golf courses, but you're unlikely to get mountain shelters for climbers or properly established camping sites and so on. You'll get motels and car parks, but no nature reserves or national parks. The other sense in which leisure is a problem is in the selection of what to do with it. People must be in a position to choose leisure activities which are going to give them pleasure or satisfaction. I don't think anyone likes being bored, and boredom is merely a symptom of not knowing what to do with leisure. And ignorance is a great begetter of pride. It's quite ridiculous to get angry or indignant with people who don't know what to do with their leisure. In most cases, they're totally ignorant of the possibilities. People are inclined to make bland statements about the duty of individuals to develop their talents to the full. This is all very laudable. But say that to an adolescent, and you might as well tell a blind man to see red. In many cases, there is virtually no provision for anything more rewarding than paying to watch other people playing games. We sometimes seem to forget that sports were intended for the pleasure of those taking part, and not only for the entertainment of spectators. For this, I think our traditional views on education and work must take a lot of the blame. The attitude is that there must be nothing frivolous in education, and hard work is the only way to a good life. Now, to this should be added, I think, the modification of those influences which create the conscience, that sense of right and wrong which is the effective controller of behavior. By that I mean the increasing isolation of individual families, the increasing materialism in ordinary education, and the increasing divergence of science and religion. These have all made it more difficult for young people to find a convincing set of rules for living. And the result is boredom, frustration, antisocial, or more usually anti-authority behavior, delinquency, and the excitement of crime. After all, it isn't people who are good and bad, it is what they do. If a community believes it is unnecessary and a waste of time to expose the younger generation to the worthwhile things of this life, it cannot in fairness complain when that generation finds its own ways of fulfilling or filling its leisure hours. The problem is that there has been a fundamental change in the practice of living which has not been matched by a change in the theory. In Thomas Jefferson's time, 94% of all Americans lived on farmsteads, with all that implies in a way of life. In 1960, an average of over 60% of Americans lived in towns and cities. And by the year 2000, this will have increased to over 70% of a population of 350 million. This implies a totally different type of existence, and it demands a totally different approach to the problems of life. And a bad social organization is as unhealthy for a community as a bad digestion is unpleasant for the body. Apparently never occurred to that self-righteous fellow, or perhaps it was a woman, when he invented the saying that the devil finds work for idle hands. Well, that it never occurred to him that he was passing the buck. Idleness was immoral and corrupt, so it's not surprising that no one felt it necessary to relieve the devil of this particular responsibility except by recommending more work. And the worst feature about idleness is that it leads to boredom, which is one of the most deadly afflictions that anyone can suffer. De Chardin, in his book The Future of Man, goes even further. Mankind is bored, he asserts. Perhaps this is the underlying cause of all our troubles. We no longer know what to do with ourselves. Hence, in social terms, the disorderly turmoil of individuals pursuing conflicting and egotistical aims. And on the national scale, the chaos of armed conflict in which, for want of a better object, the excess of accumulated energy is destructively released. Idleness, mother of all vices. And now that so much work is relatively dull and limited in time, the devil is kept pretty busy. But surely it should be possible for idle hands to be tough without being vicious, to live dangerously without being destructive, to be enterprising without being criminal. If this is possible, and I'm convinced that it is, then it is necessary to create the facilities and to let people become aware of them. Today's ideal human being appears to be what is sometimes termed a well-adjusted personality, or what H.G. Wells described as a jelly-bellied lotus eater. It's rather like suggesting that the only well-adjusted chickens in a factory farm are those who make no attempt to escape. No intelligent human being has ever been satisfied with his general environment. Dissatisfaction and frustration, for instance, has been the hallmark of all great reformers and innovators. By all means, let us be thankful that there are so many people who are content to be bored, or who are scared to be unconventional, or who are simply satisfied with their lot. These people, fortunately, create no problems. It is the ones with initiative and courage and a sense of dissatisfaction who are so easily perverted unless their gifts are attracted into constructive activities. Without the opportunity and the freedom to choose interesting, rewarding, satisfying, or fascinating things to do, the individual can only assert himself by rebelling against the restraints of society. I have no sympathy with people who claim to know what is good for others. My contention is that no one should be prevented from taking part in any reasonable activity through ignorance or lack of facilities, and no one should be forced into crime because it is the conventional thing to do. The difficulty about introducing children, or adults for that matter, to possible leisure time activities is that it is such an intensely personal matter. An improving and uplifting experience for one is a dead loss for another. It's no good trying to encourage an appreciation of music in someone who is tone deaf. By some means or other, people, and particularly young people, must be exposed to as wide a range of lifelong activities as possible, so as to allow them to become aware of the opportunities open to them. It is important to start young because up to a certain age, people don't mind being taught. After a certain age, people hate being beginners. On the other hand, the process must continue past childhood because, strangely enough, adult tastes are frequently different to those of children. and an ability to play games, however healthy, is not really enough. I don't want to give the impression that the only use of leisure is self-indulgent amusement. All voluntary work of any sort is a leisure activity, and for many it is the most rewarding and interesting use of their discretionary time. Young people in particular are enormously attracted by the invitation to help others, especially if it demands some form of qualification, such as first aid training or learning to communicate with the deaf. The response to the Peace Corps in this country, or in Britain to the opportunities for voluntary service overseas, demonstrates only too clearly that there is enormous scope among young people for this use of leisure. I suspect sometimes that people are put off attempting things which they would really very much like to do for fear of doing them badly, or because they feel it is undignified to be a beginner. Well, in the sense of professional work, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. But as far as leisure is concerned, I think Oscar Wilde had the right idea when he said, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Well, the range of choice, of course, is immense, but it is in this feature which makes leisure so vitally important. In this age of mass employment, rationalized food, identical housing, in fact a total daily environment which is common in all essentials to the vast majority of the population, the only possible point for any individuality to break through is during leisure time. It is the only discretionary time left. It is the only moment when we can snap our fingers at the rest of humanity and do something wholly satisfying to ourselves, either alone or with like-minded friends. It is, in fact, becoming the last refuge of individuality. Once it is accepted that the time we have for leisure has its own value and importance in the modern pattern of civilization, several things follow. For instance, it means that the work people do for a living need not be the central feature of their existence. The moment work becomes a means to an end, and not an end in itself, it removes the status value of any particular job, because it may well be that the leisure activity confers a higher status than the job. Therefore, leisure occupations may well have a considerable influence on the whole structure of society. Relationships at work are conditioned by strict systems of seniority, pay scales, grades of responsibility, and so on. In the community, relationships are conditioned by the size and the location of the home, the number of cars owned, and so on. Leisure occupations cut across status at work or status in the community. A common interest in skiing, for instance, or in sailing, washes out all other differences. Young or old, highly paid or relatively poor, senator or truck driver, all establish a new relationship within the leisure occupation which they share. And taking the intrinsic value of leisure a bit further, it also suggests the possibility of following a course of education and training solely for a leisure occupation, while making a living at any convenient job which needs to be done. As a matter of fact, many artists do this, something like this already. They may not be able to live on their painting, so they take some other job, teaching perhaps, to enable them to go on painting. In fact, I think it would be true to say that for the first time in history, ordinary men and women are being released from the bondage of perpetual work. For the first time in history, men and women are finding that they have time to choose something they really like doing. The problem is to make certain that more people become aware of the opportunities so that they are able to make a choice, and also to ensure that the facilities are fully and properly provided. And I think the universities can play a major part in solving this problem. In the first place, and strange though it may seem, it is the universities which produce the nation's most influential citizens. Those of you who are fortunate or clever enough to complete the course will inevitably exercise considerable influence on the future development of the nation. I dare say some of the academic staff may view this prospect with deep concern. But I see no reason to be alarmed, but then I don't live here. The thoughts and outlook, the habits of mind and ideas which you form within the environment of the university will go with you when you leave here. Therefore, the attitude of the university as a whole towards leisure and all occupations that might conceivably fill it and also towards the problems which leisure poses to a great proportion of the community, is of the utmost importance. It needs more than a generous encouragement of the traditional arts and music, or an amused tolerance towards the apparently less intellectual pursuits. It needs to stimulate a social conscience about leisure in the same way that the social conscience of the 19th century had to be stirred about poverty. Boredom and idleness are poverty of the spirit, and it will need enlightened leaders to show the way to a fuller civilization based on the rewarding use of leisure. These leaders are in the universities today, and their opportunities are immense. It's all too easy to talk about the free world and the freedom of the individual, but in practice, it is leisure and the ability to choose what to do with it which really makes a man a free and civilized individual.
Your Royal Highness, we're all most grateful, all of us most grateful to you for your presence here this morning and for your address. A very much overworked Chancellor and a very much overworked President, we're delighted to have here this morning so many members of the Board of Regents to hear your discourse on the infinite values of infinite leisure. It has suggested to me an additional item for the agenda when the Regents meet next week. Now, His Royal Highness said that he was twice a Chancellor. I was once a Chancellor. The first Chancellor appointed in the history of the University of California some 14 years ago. When I was appointed as the first Chancellor, not only I, but nobody else knew what a Chancellor was supposed to do in the University of California, not the then President, not the Board of Regents. So I decided to go to the dictionary to find what a Chancellor was. And the title Chancellor is more a British title than an American one. So I went to the Oxford Dictionary of the English language, and it said the title Chancellor is an ancient and honorable title in Great Britain. It said the Chancellor is the keeper of the King's conscience. But then I went on to say, and I have over these 14 years on occasion thought back to this part of the definition. It said the Chancellor is also the guardian of infants, idiots, and morons. And now, in public recognition of merit and distinction, the university wishes to confer honorary membership upon an individual who has been recommended for the degree by a committee of the faculty, by the Chancellor, by the President, and by the Regents of the university.
Mr. President, I present His Royal Highness the Duke the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Knight of the Garter, Knight of the Thistle, consort to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of England. He symbolizes by position, word, and deed the stability of the British Crown and the enduring traditions which this great nation has established throughout the world. Educated in Germany and Scotland, He was a naval officer during World War II and later commanded his own ship, the HMS Magpie. Sportsman and explorer, he was awarded the National Geographic Society's Gold Medal by President Eisenhower in 1958 and cited for his questing spirit. He is also deeply and actively interested in science, education, and the character development of youth. Through his sponsorship, the Duke of Edinburgh's award has helped to mold the ideals and the fitness of thousands of boys and girls in Great Britain and throughout the Commonwealth. We salute him today and welcome him to honorary membership in the University of California. By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Regents of the University of California, I confer upon Your Royal Highness the honorary degree, Doctor of Laws, and with it all the rights and privileges thereto pertaining.
Your Royal Highness, we of UCLA appreciate your presence here today. We are pleased that we can now claim you as our alumnus. Perhaps a major bonus of this newfound relationship, for one of your laudable interest in sports, is the opportunity that every alumnus has to receive automatically the scores of the several UCLA athletic contests year by year. In return for this bonus, I have no doubt that our coaches, in those moments of tension and crisis, when the crew must row just a little harder or the team play a little harder, I have no doubt that they will invoke you as an alumnus in a certain sense to provide the necessary additional effort. In short, they will say, remember, you cannot let Prince Philip down. And believe me, knowing some of our coaches, they're just likely to do that, sir. This Charter Day anniversary ceremony will be brought to a close as Professor Raymond Morman leads us in the singing of the university hymn, in which you are all invited to join, and the words of which will be found in your program. This will be followed by the benediction to be pronounced by Mr. Jones. The audience will please rise. Please remain standing for the benediction and until all those in academic attire have left the pavilion floor.
bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face to shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us his peace, his wisdom, and a sense of choice and understanding this day and forevermore. Amen.
Thank you.